Skip the commercials and get extra long shows with behind-the-scenes access at patreon.com/David C. Smalley. For more than 10 years, he's built a reputation of exploring beliefs and changing lives. And with today's division, it's time to resurrect nuance and bring back the art of conversation. He'll make you laugh. He may upset you. But most importantly, he'll make you think. From Los Angeles, California, this is David C. Smalley.
Ben Shapiro is one of the most well-known conservative pundits out there. Podcaster, talking heads, however you want to refer to him. We have a mutual friend. And I reached out to the mutual friend and I said, what's the best way to get in touch with Ben? Because I listened to his most recent podcast and there are so many issues with it. And he said, I promise you, he reads Twitter. So if you're mentioning him, if your fans are mentioning him, he's going to see it. Well, what does that mean? Because I've been tweeting at him. I've been telling him I want to have him on my show or I want to go on his podcast. I want to have a discussions at some point with him. Yes, he has a bigger audience, a much bigger audience. So I would rather do it on his podcast because more people will hear it. But if he's willing to come here, that's fine too. I just want to have the discussion. I don't like the way he sums up all left views and will take the most extreme, ridiculous leftist out there and then just assume that all Democrats or liberals think that way or operate under that mantra. It's so devoid of nuance. It's incredible. And Ben is known for talking really, really fast. Like when you listen to his podcast, it sounds like it's already on 2.5 speed without you doing anything. I'd like to meet the person who listens to Ben Shapiro's podcast and speeds it up. And what that does is that gives the appearance of a level of intellect that may be a little disarming to people. You may think it's intimidating. You may think, wow, he talked really fast and said a lot of really big words and he's just spitting facts and he's like his fan base is just rabid about how smart and amazing he is and how nobody can touch him. If you slow him down, if you stop the podcast, if you pause it, if you listen to what he actually says, much of what he says is completely missing substance. And you know that I'm not rude. You know that I'm not going to bring anybody on this show and talk down to them. And I'm certainly not going to go on his podcast and talk down to him. But we've got to call an ace an ace. And when you just ramble through something with a gish gallop with a whole bunch of stats without ever really talking about the reality, it's clear that you're pushing that specific agenda. Now, what frustrates me about the whole thing is that as he's doing that, he's accusing the left of doing exactly what he's doing. He keeps saying that we are not about solutions. We're just about rhetoric. His entire podcast is built on rhetoric. I don't know how he's saying that. And by the way, he didn't offer a single solution in his podcast. I just released one in my response to Sam Harris where I listed 13 things we could do right now to be solutions for the police brutality and the racism in America. Ben's denying that racism is even the issue. So I've pulled some clips from his most recent podcast because I haven't heard from Ben. And there have been several people tweeting at him and tweeting at me. And so if he's been on Twitter in the last 3 days, certainly he's seen it. I'd like to say I don't want to make any assumptions, but I am in this case. I think it's pretty obvious that he's seen it. And either I'm too small potatoes and he doesn't want to deal with it, or he's got some other concerns about how I conduct my show and my argumentation. I'm going to put this out there and then leave it up to him to come and defend himself or invite me on to continue this conversation. So let's get started because I'm playing a lot of audio and I don't want this podcast to be 3 hours long. Here's how he starts his most recent show.
Republicans brought up in the Senate a police reform bill. And the police reform bill didn't give Democrats everything they wanted. For example, it did not outright ban chokeholds. It said that departments had to take a look at chokeholds and decide how they would be applied, and the federal government would make its funding contingent on particular procedures put in place with regard to chokeholds. Now, there are a bunch of Democrats who think that chokeholds should be outright banned because either they are mischaracterizing what a chokehold is. There's a difference between a chokehold and a submission hold, or they're trying to deprive law enforcement of a tool that you sometimes require in order to make a situation more quiescent.
Okay, hold on. So right there, the difference between a chokehold and a submission hold, what is he talking about? I know he's hinted at being a part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have too. You know what that submission is called, Ben? It's called a rear naked choke. You're squeezing the carotid arteries of someone to reduce the oxygen flow to their brain. So, yeah, if you have your bicep on the right carotid artery and your forearm pressing into the left side, if you do it properly, it's safe. The problem is most police officers are not trained to do it properly. You can watch the training. You can see them fight people in public. I personally have been in a jiu-jitsu gym where cops come to fight. They do not understand the actual methods and breakdowns of Brazilian jiu-jitsu on how to properly apply a rear naked choke. They don't do it correctly. They will crush your larynx. They stop your breathing. That's not what the choke is supposed to do. Okay, and let's be clear too that I think just stopping the chokeholds is also misguided, even on the Democrat side. I think it's misguided. I think it needs to talk about body weight on someone's back, the ability to breathe while you're leaning on someone's back, asphyxiation. We need to ban all sorts of things like that. But I don't think it's fair to say that they're mischaracterizing a chokehold from being a submission hold, because nobody's preventing cops from putting someone in an armbar. Let's be clear about that.
As opposed to being forced to use deadly force in a case where somebody is resisting arrest. I mean, this is really one of the instances in which officers, you see an officer and the officer is trying to put somebody into a submission hold, right? They're trying to deprive oxygen to the brain, knock the person out, or at least put the person in a more quiescent state. The alternative to that is the person continuing to thrash around, struggle, maybe grab the officer's gun.
Ben so often talks in absolutes. He is so black or white, absolutes. You're going to hear him today say things like, every single time. It's not true. All they want. It's not true. These are straw man after straw man after straw man of the Democratic position. And I want to be clear. I'm not a registered Democrat. I'm an independent. I consider myself a liberal. I don't say I'm a leftist, and I'm certainly not on the right. And here lately, I can't even say I've even been in the center. I'm definitely left of center, but I'm a liberal. If you have any ounce of credibility, you should pay attention to Rappaport's rules. And if you don't know what that is, look up Dan Dennett, read his books, or Google Rappaport's rules. And the very core of Rappaport's rules are, if you don't fully understand someone else's argument, you're not yet ready to create an argument against them. You should be able to state their argument back to them in a way that they say, wow, yes, that's the way I feel, and I wish I would have put it that way. Once you can do that to someone, then you're willing to make an argument against them. But these blind strokes of alls and absolutes are just crazy. And that's not the alternative. Ben, if you walk into a situation assuming I either have to choke you or shoot you because I'm an occupying force here to dominate the streets, then yeah, you're going to be violent either way. And you say, yeah, the chokehold's pretty damn nice when you put it that way. That shouldn't be the cop's job. We are talking about a guy, in Eric Garner's case, who was standing outside allegedly selling loose cigarettes. And by the way, he wasn't even selling them at the moment they came up. They just saw him and went, hey, I saw that guy earlier today selling loose cigarettes. So they start harassing him, and he says to them, and if you listen to the audio, he says to them, why are y'all always harassing me? You're always doing this to me. This is a constant problem of harassment to Eric Garner. And the cop just grabs him, takes him to the ground, starts to choke him, eventually lets go and puts his weight on his back, and Eric eventually dies. Now, as Eric is screaming, I can't breathe, there's no chokehold being applied. It's asphyxiation. He's got health problems, he's laid flat out on his stomach, and the weight of officers is on his back. That should be outlawed. When the person is handcuffed, get the hell up. There should be no reason to sit on someone like that. So no, that's not the only alternative. I think the biggest thing that you're missing here, Ben, is de-escalation tactics. If cops didn't show up with their chest bowed out and their hand already on their gun talking down to people, people are much less likely to get violent with them. So don't act like this is a black and white world and we're living in absolutes and the only two possibilities are to choke the hell out of someone or shoot them, because that's a straw man and you know it.
Who really don't know anything about police procedure decide full out on the federal level exactly what local police departments ought to do after a 30-year continuous drop in crime in the United States.
So that's interesting. If we have a 30-year continuous drop in crime and cops are only shooting people who were committing crimes, why are police shooting deaths staying the same? Why is it about 1,000 people a year every single year, even though crime is going down? And why is it that in areas with higher violent crime, there aren't higher levels of police shootings? Which I laid out the statistics and argument in my response to Sam Harris.
I will note that the suggestion that America is endemically plagued by racist police is not backed by very much data. Jason Riley has a good piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about how the police act, talking about the real problem with police. He points out in a 2015 Gallup poll taken after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, a majority of black respondents said police treat them fairly. Far more blacks, 38%, than whites, 18%, said they want a greater police presence in their local communities. Another Gallup survey published last year asked black and Hispanic residents of low-income neighborhoods about policing and found that these groups, quote, aren't averse to law enforcement. In fact, they are particularly concerned about crime in their neighborhoods. 59% of both blacks and Hispanics said they would like the police to spend more time in their area than they currently do, making them more likely than white residents, 50%, to respond this way.
Yeah, this is one of those very carefully constructed arguments. And so it's important to note that also runs contrary to U.S. Department of Justice statistics and most major studies that have been done across the nation. Also, it's very selective. You're asking people questions like, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? And they go, yeah, not really. There's a lot of crime here. Oh, so you would like more police patrols? Well, yeah. I think if more police were catching the bad guys. Oh, cool. So we'll put you down as no systemic racism exists. Come on. Again, we're in this world of absolutes. Those statistics run direct and contrary to the statistics I found on the U.S. Department of Justice website, as well as what Sam Harris quoted in his podcast on the parts where I absolutely agreed with Sam, that black people are 18% more likely to have a gun pointed at them on a traffic stop and 24% more likely to be hands-on and be thrown up against a wall. I might have got the 18 and 24 mixed up. It doesn't really matter at this point. The point is that 18 to 24% are more likely. If you're black, you are more likely to be grabbed or have guns pointed at you by police. So is your fix to go into the black community and say, are you afraid of police? I would like to know how this survey was done. Did you give them a sheet of paper that said on a scale of 1 to Hitler, where would you rate your police department? And everybody that was 5 and under was classified as I'm not afraid of the police. This sounds sketchy to me. I'm interested in looking into it, but just throwing out statistics like this and talking at 100 miles an hour, I don't know does a lot of justice to the reality.
We have plenty of data right now. Police shootings have fallen precipitously since the 1970s. Upward of 95% of black homicides in the United States don't involve law enforcement.
I'm gonna back that up. Listen to that very closely.
We have plenty of data right now. Police shootings have fallen precipitously since the 1970s.
Where is that data? Sam said the same thing and didn't quote the source. And now Ben is saying it and didn't quote the source. Are we going to just look at our county that we share? L.A.? Ben, or you just want to talk about our home and say that cops are killing less people in Los Angeles? Say that solves it? Where is this data coming from? All of the national databases that I've found, and I always cross-reference before I open my mouth on a microphone, the national databases I've found say you are lying about this. There is no data suggesting that police shootings are down. Someone point me to this. Where are the police? Why? This year alone, it's already over 500 and I think 40 people killed by police, and we're in June. We're on pace once again to break 1,000. What are you talking about? Are we in that justified realm where you say 99% of police shootings are justified? Who's doing the investigation on that? Other cops? Internal affairs? You mean the ones that aren't on video are the ones that are considered justified? Where are you getting this statistic that police are killing fewer people?
Upward of 95% of black homicides in the United States don't involve law enforcement.
That one is bothersome. So we're only murdering 5% of your people. So this is a win for the cops? It's all about angles. I swear, when I listen to Ben Shapiro, it's like me taking a selfie from the perfect angle and just looking somewhat attractive. And then that girl showing up to that date very disappointed with reality. If you look at the statistics and squint just a little and tilt your head and put your tongue out under the right lighting, there's one piece of that sentence that sounds really good, as long as we block out reality.
If you want to talk about changing police behavior in major cities, it might be worthwhile pointing out that every one of these major cities is governed by a Democrat.
Hold on. Stop right there. There he goes again. Every one of these major cities. Every one of these cities. All of them. Okay, we'll get into that. But he's talking about this bill that got shut down by the Democrats, refusing to even debate the bill. Yeah, you're right. They did refuse to debate the bill. The reality is, and it's not, and he keeps saying because the Democrats don't really want solutions. If you actually go look at that bill, if you hear what Nancy Pelosi says about the bill, and I'm going to tell you, Nancy Pelosi is not my favorite person in the world. I've had my issues with her in the past. But if you go look at that bill and you listen to what Nancy says about it, she calls it window dressing and toothless. It doesn't have a ban on no-knock warrants. Who knew that the cops could, without knocking or saying police or come out with your hands up or we got a warrant, who knew they could just creep up to your door in silence and smash your door in and come in guns a-blazing? Who knew that was even legal? And by the way, if you have a legal firearm in your house and you hear somebody crash through your front door and you fire your gun at that intruder and it just so happens to be, surprise, the SWAT team showed up without you knowing it, you now get attempted murder of a police officer. And if they have the wrong house, well, I guess that doesn't matter too much. And if they decide to shoot back and kill your girlfriend, well, just collateral damage. Come on. The bill has to address that. That's a direct result of the Breonna Taylor situation. It has to address that. Also, there was no real mandatory data collection or anything available to the public. What the Republican bill was doing was saying, we really want you to report data, and if you do report, we'll give you incentives, and here's a cookie and a Twinkie and a carrot. But there was nothing mandatory. And by the way, the government wants to keep it secret. They do not want the public to be able to access the data of officers behaving badly and of police shootings. So this Republican bill was trying to say, okay, fine, we will do a reform bill with air quotes, but we want to secretly hide all the bad stuff cops are doing. And the Democrats said, no, we're not agreeing to that. And then, Ben, you're now calling that the Democrats don't want to get anything done? The Republicans are being shady, trying to sneak in protections for murderers.
If you want to talk about changing police behavior in major cities, it might be worthwhile pointing out that every one of these major cities is governed by a Democrat. Every single one. And you know what's easier than passing federal police reform? Having local mayors change police procedures.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. You know why cops are so confused about the damn laws? Because there's so many different regions and cities and counties and states and then the federal. Nobody ever knows what the hell's going on. So if a cop in Dallas is allowed to choke you, body slam, and tase, but the cop in Fort Worth isn't allowed to do that. He's never allowed to choke. He's only allowed to tase. And then he changes departments. What are you going to do about that? You really want this to, whether or not someone can be killed by police should be something that a municipality should deal with? As far as I know, Ben, murder is illegal in all the states. So excessive force issues should be a federal ban. I don't want to have to worry if that cop can shoot me with a taser for refusing to get out of my car when he unlawfully told me to. I don't have which county? Have I crossed into the proper county where they have to follow the Constitution, or am I allowed to be in the county? Am I in the county where they don't have to follow it because the mayor said no? There needs to be a federal mandate on this type of stuff. And all of those, they love to point out that all of them, every single one of them, how did he say it? I'm going to play it again.
If you want to talk about changing police behavior in major cities, it might be worthwhile pointing out that every one of these major cities is governed by a Democrat. Every single one.
Every single one. No, it's not. San Antonio is at the top of the list. He's nonpartisan. Mesa, Arizona is a Republican. Oklahoma City is a Republican mayor. Aurora, Colorado is a Republican mayor. Where are you getting this? Every single one. And by the way, if you really want to think about the state laws, well, out of the top 20 cities, and yes, I spent about an hour and a half researching this and counting it all up and tallying it all up, out of the top 20 cities with the most police shootings, yeah, a lot of them had Democratic-run mayors, but 15 out of the 20 had Republican governors. Now, let's just ignore that. And we're not even going to factor in the political party of the police chief or the city council members. How do you know who was doing what? Does anybody know what the police chief is, a Republican or a Democrat? Because he's the one pushing down the laws. Now, or the guidelines on how the cops should behave. Now, if the mayor wants to put something up, yeah, he can do it, but whether or not the chief actually enforces it or not is up to him. If the chief updates the training, that's up to him. And by the way, these guys are going to police academies that aren't even in the city they're working in. Do you know anything about policing? It doesn't work that way. The majority of small towns share academies. And by the way, there's no mandate on academies. Is it 4 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? It's all different. There is no blanket instruction manual for police in America. It's all based on city and municipalities and counties and state laws. So you're trying to tax these Democratic mayors for being responsible for this? When 15 out of the 20 have Republican governors? I'm just not buying it, Ben.
You'll notice that every time people talk about the evils of American racism and they mention police shootings, they never ever mention Walter Scott. It is amazing. You'll
never ever mention Walter Scott. Never ever. There he goes again. Same absolute, same blanket statement, same straw man. Never ever mention Walter Scott. That, Ben, look, I would be very, very respectful to you if you were sitting across from me, and I would say, Ben, that is not a true statement. I wouldn't say you are a liar, because that implies who you are as your character. But I will tell you that statement is incorrect. And I don't know if you're being dishonest on purpose or out of ignorance, but you're wrong. I'm on the left. I just did a show responding to Sam Harris. I talked at length about Walter Scott. Walter Scott's name gets mentioned every time someone starts listing off the names. You go watch Ben, I forget his last name right now, Crumble, I believe it is, Breonna Taylor's attorney and Ahmaud Arbery's attorney and George Floyd's family's attorney. I tweeted it out and he mentions Walter Scott. CNN mentions Walter Scott. I just watched a piece not 2 days ago where they brought up Walter Scott. MSNBC has shown the video and talked about Walter Scott. And when they talk about police shootings, they talk about the cop going to prison for that too. So I don't know what you're talking about. Are you picking one specific Democrat who mentioned a few names and didn't mention Walter Scott when you saw it? So then you get to say nobody ever mentions Walter Scott and then go, it's amazing. It's such a straw man, Ben. It's such a symptom of a weak argument that you have to twist it and make it so black and white and pretend like it never happens. Walter Scott gets mentioned a lot, but I'll let you continue on with the rhetoric as to why you believe this thing that you have made up is a real thing.
You will see them talk about how police are wrongfully shooting black men, and then you'll see them list the names of the victims. And many of these cases are cases that are really, at the very least, tough. Right? They'll mention the case of Michael Brown. Michael Brown was justifiably shot by the police. The Department of Justice under Barack Obama found that was the case.
Okay, hold on. Michael Brown. Let's talk about that one. Michael Brown is probably the one that has the least amount of information on it. You know why? Because there is no body cam. There is no surveillance video. There was only inconsistent eyewitness accounts and what the officer said. So yeah, a grand jury doesn't have a lot to go on. You remember, our country is innocent until proven guilty. At least if you're a cop, that's the freedom you get. So yeah, according to the officer's account and having the other witnesses give inconsistent information, They went with the officer's word and said he punched me. And yes, the officer's blood was inside of his own car. Okay, maybe that one was justified. Maybe. And yes, I get it. It happened under Barack Obama, and you threw that in because he's a Democrat and he's black, and you're very sneaky with the way you try to dress things. But okay, Michael Brown to me is unknown. I don't know if he should count as part of the victims or if he did really punch that officer. And by the way, the reason we don't know, a good example of that is Walter Scott. If you watch that video of Walter Scott being shot, Walter tries to run from him, and the cop shoots him in the back. Walter Scott dies. The cop walks over and throws his taser down next to Walter Scott's body, and then puts in the police report that Walter Scott took his taser. No body cam footage. And if it weren't for the person standing on the other side of the fence who had a phone with a camera, Walter Scott would be considered a justified homicide by police, and you know it. Because no one would have ever known that that cop lied.
They will mention the Rayshard Brooks case, a case in which a black man wrestled down two officers, took a taser off one.
Oh, God. See that? How fast he talks? Wrestled down two officers. Wrestled down two officers? Watch the video. Just watch the video. Okay, call it what you want, but just watch the video.
Off one, tased an officer, tried to tase the other one while running away, and then got shot.
Okay, so that's justified to you? What are you going to...
Don't mention that. Okay, that is a disputed fact pattern at the very least. To say that as a clear-cut case of racist murder is insane and completely disconnected from facts. So they'll talk about that.
Okay. We're just gonna lump that in and call it racist murder and say it's ridiculous. So you are strawmanning the people who believe that was wrong. Let's break that one down, because we're not going to talk at 100 miles an hour and try to skip. Ben, you sound like a jet ski to me. You're just on the surface, beep, 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 just zipping across the surface without ever diving in for substance. Brooks was holding a taser that had no ammunition left in it. It only has 2 rounds. And both had been fired. Who was he a danger to? Running away. Since when did running from police come with the death penalty? That officer knew that there was nothing else in that taser. It had been deployed twice. Both rounds were gone. He shot him anyway. Now, are we saying that these 2 officers were sneaking around saying, let's kill a black man tonight? No, but that's the way you paint it to make the liberals sound ridiculous. Nobody is saying that. But was he perhaps approached in the way that he was because he's black? Was he automatically feared and roughed up because he was black? Well, back to that percentage of 18% more likely to go hands-on with black men. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you walk up and grab someone? He was being polite. He was being respectful. He was sitting in his car. He wasn't even driving. In many cases, when that's a white guy, he gets to call a friend to come pick him up and leave his car overnight. When we care about each other as human beings, that's the way we treat each other. So no, did those 2 cops set out to murder a black man? I don't know. With the recent audio coming out of that hidden audio from the police car about men, these guys wanting to get his AR-15 and start slaughtering N-words. Yeah, there are some cops who do that, Ben. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the fake news or not, but it's out there. You know, the fake audio on the fake news of the fake cops talking about fake killing people and using racial slurs. I'm sure it's all fake, but it's out there, Ben, whether you want to pay attention to it or not. But when Brooks was shot, he was not a danger to anyone. He was running away. And evading police may be a felony, but it does not come with the punishment of death. But that officer decided to be executioner that day. Would he have had more sympathy for a white man? Statistics say yes.
They'll talk about Tamir Rice, which is a horrible situation in which a 12-year-old boy was shot by the police after he was going around in a park and he had a pellet gun, he had a BB gun. but he had sawed off the front of the BB gun, the orange part. Normally when you buy a BB gun, there's an orange part on the front that lets deliberately there, that lets the cops know that this is not an actual gun. They got a call, the police got a call, that there was somebody who was running around the park with an actual gun. They got there, and there was somebody who was running around the park with what appeared to be an actual gun and didn't stop and put down the gun when told to do so. That doesn't mean the shoot was good, but to try and say that that is a racist murder based solely on the race of the 12-year-old child, Tamir Rice, to lump all these things together, right? Those are the disputed cases.
No, absolutely not, Ben. I don't know why you would sit down in front of a microphone without doing your research, but you talk so fast and your fans think you're amazing. But those of us who do research, we see you. We see through what you're doing. First of all, using the term sawed off is completely inaccurate. Nothing was sawed off about that gun. It was an airsoft gun. Please understand the difference between BB and pellet. BB and pellet guns have metal bullets that could cause some form of damage. But all three, airsoft, BB, and pellet guns, go at under 500 feet per second and are considered non-lethal. Nothing was sawed off about this gun. It had a little orange circle dot in it. We've all seen a little orange circle in play guns. And that had been pulled out by his friend who took the toy apart to fix something. And when he put it back together, he said he couldn't get the little orange thing back in the hole. And then Tamir Rice traded a smartphone for that gun and was killed that day. So nothing was sawed off. The cops said that he was 20 years old when they called back into the radio. Shots fired, black male, 20 years old. He was 12. Now you tell me why a 12-year-old black kid would be seen as being 20 years old to cops. You really don't think the skewing of making black men look scary over decades in our country has anything to do with a white officer thinking that Tamir Rice was more of a threat than he actually was? You said that Tamir refused to put the gun down when ordered to do so. That's what you just said. They shot him within 2 seconds of showing up, Ben. Go watch the video. They pull up, jerk the door open, jump out of the car, and pop, pop, pop. He's dead. There was no command to put the gun down. Where are you getting this from? Trust me, if you say it fast enough, your listeners will just keep nodding like a bobblehead and going, yeah, Ben's good, Ben talk fast, Ben's smart. But where's your substance? He was never ordered to put that gun down. He was killed within 2 seconds. Go look. You don't even have to take my word for it. You don't have to go read it anywhere. They'll all tell you within 2 seconds. Go look up the video of him being shot and look at your little YouTube counter. From the time the cop stops and the time he gets out of the car, 2 seconds, Tamir is dead. And they thought a 12-year-old boy was 20 years old. No department would ever teach that if someone has a gun, drive up within 5 feet of them and jump out of the car afraid for your life. That is idiotic. If someone has a gun and they're not currently pointing it at someone, you stay away from them. You get behind something safe and you call out to them. What if they're wanting to hurt themselves? What if they're suicidal? You talk to the person to see how their mental health is, what their intentions are. But if you see yourself as an occupying force, sent to dominate and control the society, and you've been viewing black men as these big scary creatures to fear for tons and tons of years, if you've seen them as super predators, as Hillary Clinton said, and big scary black men being used to scare people all the time on television, maybe that had something to do with it too. But every cop I've talked to about that Tamir Rice situation says the tactics were horrendous. You stay back. You get out of your car. You order them from a distance to get down. You watch any felony stop or high-risk stop. The cop doesn't run up to the car with his gun out. He stays in the back and orders them to get out of the car, put their hands out, walk back towards the sound of my voice, get on your knees, put your hands behind your head, cross your ankles, and then they walk up and handcuff while the other cops point their guns at the car, and then they clear the car collectively and everybody's safe. Now you're telling me that he was ordered to put the gun down and refused to listen? Where, Ben? When? Where's the audio recording of this? I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Here's an undisputed case. The case of Walter Scott. He never gets mentioned in this litany. It's truly amazing. We'll see this a little bit later when we get to Nicole Hannon-Jones's awful piece on reparations. The attempt to lump all these cases together that have very, very different fact patterns, and then they ignore the one most clear-cut racist case. Why? Because what happened in that case? What happened? The police officer went to jail for murder. So they won't talk about that case. Because in a case where the system worked, they won't talk about it.
Why should we talk about it any more than we already have? We do list Walter Scott's name, but if that cop is already in jail, what's there to protest? We got him. What do you expect us to do, Ben? When the system works, should we continue bitching about it? That's exactly what's supposed to happen. That district attorney shouldn't get extra brownie points for doing exactly what he's supposed to do and putting a murderer in jail. The issue is the reason he was able to go to jail is because an outside source took video and risked their own life, by the way, to walk up on a police officer and hide in between trees to get video. Because like I said, and you know damn good and well, Ben, if that guy didn't have that phone, Walter Scott would be considered one of the 99% justified homicides by police. Because they're the good guys and we believe what they say.
The Ahmaud Arbery case, that case in Georgia, a Georgia grand jury has just indicted 3 suspects in the Ahmaud Arbery case. And that was the case of the black guy who was jogging through the neighborhood after trespassing on an open construction site, which is not an excuse to try and roadblock somebody and then confront them with a shotgun, which is exactly what happened. And Arbery ends up being murdered, according to the prosecutors. The alleged vigilante-style murder of Arbery by 3 white men who mistook him for a burglar ignited nationwide outrage, but not as much nationwide outrage as George Floyd, you'll notice, right? The George Floyd case is much more paid attention to. Why? Because I suppose the idea is that in this case, the system works. So whenever the system works, the media pay less attention to it. That's the way this works. When the system works, the media pay less attention to it. The media have an interest in driving a particular narrative.
Oh, my goodness. All right, I'm going to play this again and break it down because there are so many things wrong with this. And this is very, very disappointing how this is turning out. And I think that Ben Shapiro listeners are manipulated in a way that they don't even realize what's going on as they're listening. So let me bring some things to your attention.
The Ahmaud Arbery case, that case in Georgia, a Georgia grand jury has just indicted 3 suspects in the Ahmaud Arbery case. And that was the case of the black guy who was jogging through the neighborhood after trespassing on an open construction site.
Okay. Notice how he said trespassing, not alleged trespassing. There is video of him walking up to the site, looking in, turning around, and leaving. He didn't break any laws. He didn't go in and do any damage. The guy who owns the property said he looked at the cameras and said nothing was wrong. He walked up and looked in. And it was just walls built of a house. There was no, and it was just the wood. Like you could see through it from the street. But he walked up and looked around. Maybe he was just interested in how a house is built. I got to be honest with you. I used to install security systems. And when I would go to what's called a pre-wire, which is when they've only built the foundation and the basics of the walls, I would get to go in and put the security system in before the walls were there so I didn't have to drill through anything. It was really interesting for the first time looking around at what a house looks like as it's being built. We don't know why Ahmaud Arbery was there. We don't know. But you just said trespassed. Now, when you get to the murder, you're going to say alleged. Pay attention to the linguistics here. And Ben, often accuses others of being creative with their language to manipulate. And I don't think Ben Shapiro listeners quite understand what's happening when they are listening to him. He just said Ahmaud Arbery trespassed. That's a crime. But the guys who killed him, who murdered him, they allegedly did it. Listen how creative this gets.
Site, which is not an excuse to try and roadblock somebody and then confront them with a shotgun, which is exactly what happened. And Arbery ends up being murdered, according to the prosecutors.
Murdered according to the prosecutors. No, Ben, he was murdered. It's on video. You can see the man be killed. You saw him hunted down and killed. But according to the prosecutors? As though you're staying neutral on that part?
The alleged vigilante-style murder of Arbery by 3 white men who mistook...
Alleged vigilante style. Are you reading from something now, or are these your words? So he's a trespasser, murdered according to the prosecution, alleged vigilante-style murder. Have you ever even thought, he's talking so fast, have you ever even thought about how your brain gets manipulated to agreeing with him even when he doesn't have the facts?
Took him for a burglar, ignited nationwide outrage, but not as much nationwide outrage as George Floyd, you'll notice, right? The George Floyd case is much more paid attention to. Why? Because I suppose the idea is that in this case, the system works. So whenever the system works, the media pay less attention to it. That's the way this works. When the system works, the media pay less attention to it. The media have an interest in driving a particular narrative.
I wouldn't say the system worked in the Ahmaud Arbery case. Didn't it take like 3 months for those guys to be arrested? How was that the system working? And it was on video and it leaked. I mean, again, if that wasn't on video, who knows whose story we would have had to believe? Probably the 2 white guys, one who's a former cop. He came at us. He had a gun. I took it. He started screaming at me. If you're dead, your murderer gets to say anything he wants in court. Who knows? This might have been one of those 99% justified homicides without video being leaked. And no, Ben, the reason George Floyd struck a chord with everyone is because it was so damn blatant and obvious and in HD and wasn't recorded from 40 yards away in a truck behind a truck. It wasn't recorded through trees. It was the nonchalant murder with a knee in the neck of a man pleading for his life. Bystanders surrounding him, wanting to help, but being prevented from helping by police. He was yelling out, "I'm going to die this day. I can't breathe." And Derek Chauvin had his hand in his damn pocket. It's on camera. We see George Floyd's face, crying, calling out for his mother, screaming, "I can't breathe," screaming, "I'm going to die this day." The man was handcuffed. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, his knee stayed on his neck. And he died right before our eyes, Ben. We watched him take his last breath on video. That's why George Floyd's name can be heard around the world. This isn't manipulation time where you can say that because the system worked. The system didn't work in the Ahmaud Arbery case. It's just now catching up to itself after leaked footage. But George Floyd hit all of us right in the chest. When have we ever in this country seen someone on television crying out for their mother, saying "you're going to kill me," and we watch them die because we're afraid the police are going to hurt us? You understand, if I had been standing there and if I had walked over and pushed Derek Chauvin off of George Floyd, I probably would have been shot. We are not supposed to have these types of interactions with the people who are sworn to protect and serve our communities. That's why George Floyd's name is so important.
Instances of non-racism are portrayed as continuing grievances about racism. So, perfect example. Bubba Wallace yesterday finally admitted, "Oh yeah, by the way, that wasn't a noose." Do you remember that whole NASCAR? There was a noose in his garage. And then Bubba Wallace went on.
I'm going to back this up, start it over, and let him do this again. But I have to let you know, this is an outright lie. Bubba Wallace did not say it's not a noose. Okay? I'm going to back this up, and this is going to be another reality check here for Ben Shapiro. What he's about to tell you is a lie. Bubba Wallace never said it was not a noose. Listen carefully to every word, because I'm going to dissect this one.
Instances of non-racism are portrayed as continuing grievances about racism. So, perfect example. Bubba Wallace yesterday finally admitted, "Oh yeah, by the way, that wasn't a noose." Do you remember that whole NASCAR? There was a noose in his garage. And then Bubba Wallace went on national TV and he said, "No, it was a straight up noose." I was like, "Nope, dude, that was not a straight up noose. That was not a noose. It was not a noose. It was a hand pull. It wasn't even a slip knot, right? It was a hand pull on a garage door." And Bubba Wallace was like, "No, it's a straight up noose." And the entire left started mimicking this notion that we should still worry about this as a racist incident even after it has been debunked. Well, finally, Bubba Wallace puts out a good statement, which he should have put out in the first place. He says, it's been an emotional few days. First off, I want to say how relieved I am. The investigation revealed this wasn't what we feared it was. I want to thank my team, NASCAR, and the FBI for acting swiftly and treating this as a real threat. I think we'll gladly take a little embarrassment over what the alternatives could have been. Make no mistake, though some will try, this should not detract from the show of unity we had on Monday and the progress we've made as a sport to be more welcoming for all. Here's the New York Times' headline. Talladega noose incident puts spotlight on NASCAR's troubles with racism. Oh, so a thing that didn't happen highlights NASCAR's troubles with racism. So the thing's debunked by the FBI, and you're still going with the story that this highlights NASCAR's troubles with racism?
Oh, my God, I can't anymore. Listen, it was not debunked by the FBI. What they said was they couldn't find who did it, so they couldn't confirm that this was a hate crime. That's what they said. Okay? So whoever did do it got away with it. Let's be clear about something. Nobody ever came out and said it wasn't a noose. Here's what the investigation actually found. And this may be shocking to fans of Ben Shapiro. NASCAR conducted a thorough sweep of every single garage in all 29 tracks, which is a total of 1,684 garage stalls. 1,684 garage stalls. Out of the 1,684, only 11 had a pull-down rope that was tied in a knot. And only one of them looked like a noose. And that one was discovered in Bubba Wallace's garage. NASCAR confirmed that the noose was not in the garage prior to October 2019. But it was unable to determine, quote, with any certainty who tied this rope in this manner or why it was done. So, our ultimate conclusion for this investigation is to ensure that this never happens again and no one walks by a noose without recognizing the potential damage it can do. We cannot determine whether it was someone on their team or someone else. We have no idea what the intent was or whether there was any malice. We have no idea if it was fashioned as a noose for a pulley. We just don't know that. That's what they determined. But it is the only one out of 1,684 garage stalls that is fashioned to look like a noose. And it just so happens to be in the one stall where your only black driver is. But make no mistake about it, Ben, the FBI did not debunk this. They did not find out who did it so they couldn't press any charges or confirm that there was a hate crime. But it was a noose, and it was the only noose in 1,684 stalls. You are twisting reality to fit your preconceived narrative.
The entire motor team over at Talladega, all the drivers, all the pit crews, marched with Bubba Wallace to the front of Talladega over an incident that didn't happen to fight supposed racism. And your headline at the New York Times is Talladega noose incident puts spotlight on NASCAR's troubles with racism.
Yeah.
Of course that has to be your headline, because if you actually put the fact in the headline, non-noose incident with...
Oh, now you're concerned about facts. Come on. Just 10 minutes of research will solve this for you, Ben.
Significant overreaction against racism, against a racist incident that did not occur. Put spotlight on racism. Like, it makes no sense. The minute the facts are known, this story makes no sense.
No, what makes no sense to me is that you are put on a pedestal by conservatives as this super bright, really badass debater, but you're coming to the table empty-handed. I don't know why you're not doing your research before you're putting things like this out, Ben. It's insulting to the intelligence of people who are listening to you. If you're just believing Ben Shapiro, you need to take a step back and fact check him, please.
Okay, here's the best story. Mitchell Erickson's fingers began dialing 911 last week before he had a chance to even consider alternatives when two black teenagers who looked to be 15 at most cornered him outside his home a block away from the park. One of the boys pointed a gun at Mr. Erickson's chest, demanding his car keys. Flustered, Mr. Erickson handed over a set, but it turned out to be the house keys. The teenagers got frustrated and ran off and stole a different car down the street. Mr. Erickson said later he would not cooperate with the prosecutors in the case against the boys. After the altercation, he realized that if there was anything he wanted, it was to offer them help. But he still felt it had been right to call the authorities because there was a gun involved. 2 days after an initial conversation, his position had evolved. In thinking more about it, he wrote in a text message, I regret calling the police. It was my instinct, but I wish it hadn't been. I put those boys in danger of death by calling the cops. What about the fact the boys had put his life in danger? Quote, yeah, I know. And yeah, it was scary. But the cops didn't really have much to add after I called them. I haven't been forced to think like this before. So I would have lost my car. So what? At least no one would have been killed. Okay, you're talking about the end of civil society here. Right? What you're talking about is the end of civil society. You cannot hold people to the basic standards of acting like a human being, like, oh, I don't know, don't point your gun at somebody's chest and threaten to shoot them if they don't let you steal their car. Okay, but you can't call the cops, because if you call the cops, you're a racist. Does anybody think any of this is sustainable? Does anybody think any of this is sustainable? Of course, none of this is sustainable. The idea that personal responsibility has disappeared into the vast ether of systemic oppression is so dangerous for any society. Again, if you want to point to a system that needs to be changed, then change the system. If you want to point to a racist person doing a racist thing, then let's all fight that together. But don't give me, I can't call the cops when someone points a gun at my chest and steals my car.
Just a landmine of straw man. Nobody would call him racist. You were having to straw man the left to think that, to make your listeners believe that Democrats think that anybody who calls the cops on a person of color is automatically racist. Literally nobody believes that. Like literally nobody. You were building a straw man of this leftist monster, and then you're just tipping him over so easily, and your fans think you're this undefeated genius. I would not call anybody racist for calling the cops on a 15-year-old black kid who put a gun to their chest. But I also identify with the white guy after the fact to say, okay, so what? My car's gone, but at least those kids aren't dead for something that they're making a mistake doing at 15 years old. If the cops knew how to respond like grown-ups and didn't have a history of pointing guns at black people at a higher rate, at killing black men at a higher rate, we wouldn't think this way. So you're addressing the symptom and not wanting to cure the disease.
She says, it has been more than 150 years since the white planter class last called up slave patrols and deputized every white citizen to stop, question, and subdue any black person who came across their paths in order to control and surveil a population who refused to submit to their enslavement. It has been 150 years since white Americans could enforce slave laws that said white people acting in the interest of the planter class would not be punished for killing a black person. Those laws morphed into the black codes passed by white Southern politicians at the end of the Civil War to criminalize behaviors like not having a job. Those black codes were struck down and altered over the course of decades, eventually transmuted into stop and frisk, broken windows, and of course, qualified immunity. Okay, that is just such such a sheer lie. That the basic idea that slave patrols morphed into stop and frisk, that is nuts. That is nuts.
Is it? Do you have any evidence suggesting that it's not? Because you didn't provide any. You just call it nuts and make your bobbleheads continue to agree with you. What makes that nuts? Do you have any idea when our prison boom happened, Ben? Do you think it's any correlation at all that it happened right around 1865? Do you think it's any correlation, Ben, that the 13th Amendment doesn't really abolish slavery, but it abolishes slavery unless you're convicted of a crime, and that slavery can be leveraged as punishment? Does it make any sense that when slavery was abolished, 4 million slaves were freed and the workforce of America was at risk? And the way to fix it was to convict these black folks of crimes and put them back on the chain gangs to make them work again? You think any of that's related, Ben? Really, it has nothing to do with it. The fact that the prison boom happened around 1865 and we started building prisons and arresting African Americans en masse has nothing to do with the abolition of the partial abolition of slavery and racism in America. Things like, I don't know, reading being outlawed. Being homeless, being a vagrant, it was considered illegal. You could be arrested for being homeless. So your slave owner says, fine, you can leave, get out of here. And at the end of the street, guess who's waiting on you? Where do you live? What's your address? Come with me. It's not nuts, Ben. You got to look back further than 30 years.
Is this about solutions? The answer is, of course, it's not about solutions. You could cut a check to everybody in America today who is black. And it would not alleviate either, number one, the historical wrongs that were done. It would not alleviate that at all, right? Okay. All those historical wrongs would still exist. And also, it would probably not alleviate, and when I say probably, I mean almost indubitably, would not fix all of the gaps between white and black in the United States, absent changes in other factors.
Exactly, which is why, rather than saying that nobody on the left has any solutions, take my invitation to come on my show or invite me onto yours. I have 13 solutions that I laid out in my podcast. I keep screaming it from the mountaintops, and conservatives won't have me on your shows. And the people who do want to have me on say, let's just talk about comedy. One of the solutions that I laid out, Ben, was reparations in the form of community building. I want to hear a conservative argument for why this wouldn't work, because I haven't heard one yet. We could do reparations in the form of community building in low-income black areas to build wealth, to build opportunity. Go listen to my other episode of my response to Sam Harris for the details on how that could happen. But there are some of us out here with real solutions. And I don't think the solution is writing checks to individual African Americans, because then you get into someone who's a quarter black or 50% black or 3/4 black. I mean, what? And then some of them have babies. So do you get 2 checks if you have 2 babies? I mean, you're right. This could be ridiculous. But rebuilding those communities, giving loans, home loans to African-American communities to help build their own communities so that businesses want to come there and thrive and create more opportunities for growth and wealth and inheritance. That is reparations. I think that could honestly work. It's not in the form of individual checks. So once again, this is just a random straw man shutting down an entire concept of reparations because one idea doesn't seem like it would work. Stop living in black and white of absolutes and straw men. Bring back nuance. Let's resurrect nuance and have an actual conversation about it, Ben.
The fact is that the drivers of the income gap, for example, are things like dropout rates in schools, inability to get a good education from schools, single motherhood rate. These things do matter. But according to Nicole Hannah-Jones, they don't matter whatsoever, like at all. I don't just mean she says they don't matter enough. I mean, she literally says in the essay they do not matter at all. Confounding factors do not matter. There is a direct quote in this piece. Here's the direct quote in this piece. You ready? To summarize, none of the actions we are told black people must take if they want to lift themselves out of poverty and gain financial stability, not marrying, not getting educated, not saving more, not owning a home, can mitigate 400 years of racialized plundering. None of those. And so all personal responsibility has been lifted. Every inequality in American life is attributable to slavery.
Did you hear him just lie to you? This is what I'm talking. This is the mystery of Ben Shapiro to me. He just lied. He said that she literally says it doesn't matter. And then in his quote, she did not say that. Here, I got to play it again.
Is this about solutions?
Let's go here.
The answer is, of course, it's not about solutions. You could cut a check. I don't just mean she says they don't matter enough. According to Nicole Hannah-Jones, they don't matter whatsoever. Like,
they don't matter whatsoever, and then he's going to say she literally says they don't matter.
Like at all. I don't just mean she says they don't matter enough. I mean, she literally says in the essay they do not matter at all.
Okay, so let's see if she says that those issues do not matter. Let's see if that's what she actually said.
Confounding factors do not matter. There is a direct quote in this piece. Here's the direct quote in this piece. You ready? To summarize, none of the actions we are told black people must take if they want to lift themselves out of poverty and gain financial stability, not marrying, not getting educated, not saving more, not owning a home, can mitigate 400 years of racialized plundering.
That's true. It won't mitigate 400 years of racialized plundering, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Ben, you were putting words in her mouth, building a straw man, making her sound ridiculous to your listeners. And then I don't know why you would include the quote that proves you wrong. Maybe it's because you know your listeners aren't paying attention.
None of those. And so all personal responsibility has been lifted.
Yeah,
every inequality in American life is attributable to slavery.
Yeah, all personal responsibility is lifted. All. There he goes again with the absolute. All personal responsibility. Have you ever heard any Democrat say anything that an African American does is perfectly fine? Any crime they commit, just let it slide. No personal responsibility. You are painting us to be ridiculous on the left and then pushing down that straw man.
Okay, but this is the linguistic trick. Again, America has not changed. America has just transmuted.
Yeah, remember that. Linguistic trick. Linguistic trick. That should have been the name of your podcast, Ben.
Okay, but this is the linguistic trick. Again, America has not changed. America has just transmuted. America has not gotten any better. America has just gotten more subtle. Racism never went away. Racism is in fact there, and it is racism that is the driving indicator of inequality between white between white and black. That is the driving factor in American life. Which again, and by the way, when you say 400 years of racialized plundering, to again equate today, to get to 400 years of racialized plundering, you have to go 1619 to 2019. Right? To say that there's been no mitigation whatsoever of racialized plundering in the United States, between full-on slavery and the end of slavery and Jim Crow and the end of Jim Crow, is to be historically lying, which is what, of course, she's very good at. She's very good at this. And all of this is designed not to create solutions. It is not designed to help Black Americans. All it is designed to do is tear down the system about our ears and to suggest that the system itself, the system of individualism, the system of meritocracy, is inherently flawed, inherently biased.
Okay, Ben. So, since you don't seem to think that race has anything to do with the income gaps or the inequality, and you want to blame things like they're not educated enough or their families don't stay together or they're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and there's no personal responsibility, if that's what you're going to blame this on, I need to tell you some things. But I feel like I should say them in a way that you will understand it. The average white family currently has a net worth of $919,000, but black families, it's only $140,000. Gaps in wealth between black and white households are due to accumulated inequality and discrimination over several years, as well as differences in power and opportunity that can be traced back to the beginning of our country, with things like Freedmen's Savings Bank, which left 61,000 depositors losing $3 million, or the violent massacre, which decimated Tulsa's Greenwood district, also known as Black Wall Street, back in 1921. They lost millions of dollars, along with discriminatory policies throughout the 20th century, including the Jim Crow Black Code, which, by the way, limited resources in African-American communities in the South, promoted redlining, which prevented blacks from buying homes. All of that means that from 1934 to 1968, 98% of federal home loans were provided to white families only. That's 98%. So for 3 decades, white families in white suburbs were selling their homes to other white families who were approved for new home loans, and those families were selling their homes and buying bigger homes using the equity from those other homes they sold to other white people. That wealth brought in businesses, increased jobs, hair salons, grocery stores, opportunities, and access to resources, inheritance, land, property, everything's passed down, better funded schools, higher paid teachers, and additional education and after-school programs, which perpetuated that success. And by the way, that also removed white kids from the streets, making them less likely to be arrested. Now, don't get me wrong, efforts by black Americans to build wealth can be traced all the way through American history, but those efforts, you see, they were impeded in a host of ways, which only started with 246 years of slavery. But it was followed up, you see, by congressional mismanagement of the GI Bill, which exempted agricultural and service occupations, which disproportionately affected minority communities because they were already struggling to survive working those jobs. And by the way, a recent study from the Corporation of Economic Development notes that it would take 228 years for the average black family to amass the same level of wealth the average white family holds right now. There are over 8 million white homes who have millionaires, but less than 300,000 black homes do. In 2016, the Forbes 400 had a combined net worth of over $900 billion, over 37% of the total net worth of America. Yet, every single one of those people at the top of that list were white. So, whether you want to count the last 400 years, the last 100 years, the last 50 years, we have set minorities up to fail in this country, and you want to hold them to task for personal responsibility because race isn't the problem? Well, then what the hell is it, Ben? Drive like you know each other.